Welcome into the Western Front, presented by Victory Plus, the exclusive home of the Western Hockey League. You know the Western Front is our usual twice weekly whip around the Western Hockey League, but today I'm pleased to be joined by CHL President Dan MacKenzie. Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Really excited to talk to you. And let's start with the upcoming CHL-USA Prospects Challenge, which kicks off right here on Victory Plus, streaming globally. You can watch the games in Canada on TSN, but next Tuesday in Calgary, next Wednesday, November 26th in Lethbridge, Alberta. Just talk to me about your excitement level as we get back to seeing this cross-border clash once again.
Well, we're really excited. We think it's going to be the games are going to be amazing. This is I think the one thing I would say versus maybe a traditional prospects game or an all-star game. It's not an all-star game. I think given the format of the best players in the Canadian Hockey League coming together and then playing against the U.S. national team. There's some real stakes on the line. We saw it last year where the games had quite a bit of jam to them, we'll call it. And the kids really care. They number one, it's exciting for them because you got an arena full of NHL scouts. I think this is one of the events, maybe other than the U18s, where, every single GM and head of scouting from the NHL clubs is going to be there. So you got an arena full of scouts, but then you've also got, the best of the best on the ice. I think last year we had, when it's all said and done, I think it worked out to about half of the first round played in this game. So if you're a fan of what the future of the NHL is going to look like, this is a pretty good place to be next Tuesday and Wednesday.
Yeah, no doubt. You're right. Nailed it on the head. 16 of the 32 first-round picks last year played on Team CHL. This year, Team CHL features 14 A-rated prospects, while the U.S. National Development Program has one. So you're right. The math checks out. Roughly half of the projected first-round picks upcoming will be playing on Tuesday and Wednesday night in Calgary and Lethbridge. Can you give us some origin story on how this all came together from your end and how you eventually see maybe what's the next level of this? Could we see more of stuff like this based on the buy-in you've gotten from the top players in your leagues?
Yeah, I think the origin story was really a couple of years ago at one of our board meetings. We were talking about our prospects game, and I think one of the things the prospects game that we had for years was a great event, and it was it showcased 40 players across the CHL, but and we basically put two teams together and had them play each other. But we were looking at trying to make the game maybe a little more competitive and interesting, and a bit more of a, like we said earlier, maybe a few more stakes on the line. And so we talked about playing the U.S. National Development Team as an option, and we didn't know if they would be interested. So I reached out to the group over there, and we had a discussion, and they had an interest. I mean, they're kudos to them. They really want to expose those kids to the best development opportunities they can. They play NCAA teams, they play in Europe, they move around, and this opportunity to play against the best in the CHL was something that they were interested in doing. And so we put together a deal, and it was a pretty simple arrangement. It's a 3-year deal with an option for a fourth. We're going to rotate it around our leagues. So last year was in Ontario. This year it's in the West, and the next year we'll move it to the Q. And then the following year, if the U.S. wants to, if we decide we want to continue with it, I should say, we've agreed to play a game in Plymouth in their home arena in year 4, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, obviously, lots has changed since that day when we came to an agreement in terms of the development system with the recent rule from the NCAA changing eligibility status for CHL players. So who knows where that's going to take us, and if it will impact or not impact events like this. But I think for us, we're trying to put together events that showcase our players in the best way possible and create real opportunities for them to be able to compete in meaningful games. And I think this format sort of checks that box, in that, again, when you speak to the players on both sides of the event that played last year, they really found this format to be interesting and something they really cared about giving their best for.
Yeah, I don't care what sport it is. You can never go wrong putting Canada and the US against each other. And the West, of course, will be well represented. The WHL, they're certainly a huge contributor to this roster as you take a look at some of the players from the WHL that are going to be competing in this USA CHL Prospect Challenge. Interestingly, you mentioned the rotation and moving this game around between the OHL, the Q, and the WHL in terms of location, but it's always fascinating to see what the rotation looks like in terms of where the top end talent is coming from as it relates to the NHL draft. We know the impact that Connor Bedard is making, of course, in the NHL. Gavin McKenna, a WHL product. There's other prospective number one NHL picks if you stretch out to 27 and 28 in the NHL draft, whether it's Landon Dupont and Maddox Schultz. Can you just talk briefly about, sort of this rise that we've seen from the WHL specifically in generating some top end NHL talent?
For sure, and it's you hit the nail on the head in terms of what the recent past has been and what the future looks like. There's some amazing players being developed in Western Canada, like no doubt. And I think when you get into the reasons why, I think there's a bunch of them. I think the evolution of the development system in the West has really, to me, has been something that you can't ignore. So in terms of school sport hockey and some of the development programs that have existed, along with the traditional programs, developed through Hockey Canada and the branches. So I think there's a lot of options for young players in the West to take various paths to get where they need to get to. And with 23 teams or 23 teams in the West, or looking down the line, I think you're going to have real opportunities in those communities for kids who want to play junior hockey to get exposed to it at a young age. So I think it's great. It is cyclical. We have seen, I haven't been here in this job for that long, but I think the year I started, I think Lafreniere was the number one pick that year, right? So he came from the Q. It does move around a little bit in terms of year to year, but the West is very, very well positioned given the recent history and some of the players that you mentioned. As we look forward, it's going to be exciting to see.
Yeah, we're talking about potentially 5 number one overall picks in a 7-year span. I think only the OHL has done that previously. So pretty exciting times in the West. Now let's talk about the changing development landscape, because it's been fascinating to try and all of us to wrap our brains around how much this landscape has been changing over the last, call it 18 months or so. And I think maybe we even see that in this upcoming CHL-USA Prospects Challenge, because when you take a look at Team CHL, Dan, there's 4 Americans that are going to be playing in this game on Team CHL, including perhaps most interestingly, JP Hurlburt from the Kamloops Blazers, who is a product of the U.S. National Development Program. So as we begin to kind of sift through this and wrap our arms around it, how much does this add another layer to even just something as simple as this prospect challenge when you've got Americans on the Team CHL side?
Well, I think it's indicative of probably where we're going. I think the old model, for those maybe who don't understand or don't know, was that if you played in the CHL, you were ineligible to play in the NCAA. You couldn't do it. You were viewed as a professional or semi-professional, so you weren't allowed to play. And with that rule change now, I think what we're seeing is a lot of young North American players, and probably more Americans than in the past, are looking at the CHL as a vehicle to develop, and they didn't look that way before, because their goal was to play NCAA hockey, and they wanted to play college hockey. And so now that the CHL is available to them, we're seeing more and more players take advantage of that opportunity. We had based on what we've seen in terms of player movement in the first year since the rule change, we've had about 250 players come into our league that we would say wouldn't have considered it in the past because they would have lost their eligibility. These would have been players who were in an alternate league that allowed them to keep their eligibility. So that 250 is not all Americans, but a good significant portion of them are. And so I think it's indicative of, like as you said on the front end, not exactly sure where it's going to go. I think we're all keeping our eye on it, and it's going to take some time. But I think that for us, we think that we obviously have a pretty good track record of developing players for the National Hockey League. Just under half of all NHL players have come through the CHL. And we think that as time goes on and as the dust settles and players and their families and their agents make choices about what's best for their development, we feel pretty comfortable that the CHL is going to be a stop on that path. For most players who want to make it to the National Hockey League. So we think that with the rule change, that's going to be the future we're going to be looking at.
Yeah, there's no doubt that everything you said makes perfect sense in terms of the doors have now been opened that otherwise wouldn't have been. And that 250 number is fascinating. Have you sensed a change in mindset from some of your member clubs about how you think about the overall process now? And what I mean by that is, previously, we just touched on Gavin McKenna. And of course, Medicine Hat would love to keep Gavin McKenna. Who wouldn't? But is there a thought process now changing to, hey, we're happy to have him for however long he wants to be here, and then we are graduating this player to the next step of whatever he believes is best for his development path? And how is that push and pull sort of evolved as you've seen it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Frank. I think that's something that we're all still working towards, right? And there's going to be changes ahead in terms of how the system adjusts to the new reality. So in the old system, it was very, it evolved over about 45 years, I think, and that, it was very clear and pretty simple in a lot of ways. And I think now, we are going to be faced with, and our teams and our clubs are beginning to, understand that as they're bringing players in, that those players may not desire to stay for their full 4 years, where, in the past, the vast majority of players stayed for 4 years because that was the path you went through, and the way the rules were set up, that was the path. I think that path has changed, and I think that the open question right now is really what's best for each player, and you mentioned Gavin McKenna. There's others who have decided in their draft year, in their fourth year, they want to stay in the CHL and wear a letter and play in all situations, play a lot of games, and that's our model. And there are other players who are deciding that they want to go a different route, and they think that's better for their development. So I think that's the reality of it. I mean, players are going to make their choice. These changes have been very much pro player. And then I think for us, again, we see ourselves as being a development league for the National Hockey League. And for those who don't make the National Hockey League, we see opportunities, whether it be in, the NCAA, in, the AHL, ECHL, U Sports. There's lots of opportunities if you're not going to be that player. And, the one thing that's unique about our leagues, I'm sure you're aware, is we do offer scholarships to our players. So for the guys who don't, very small percentage end up going on and playing pro hockey somewhere. If you play in our leagues, you end up getting contributions for every year you play to a scholarship fund that you can use at any institution when you're done. So, we think we've got sort of both sides of the ledger sort of covered, in that the elite guys, we want to prepare them for the NHL. And then if that doesn't happen, they have other options, whether it be schooling or pro hockey in other places. So, but it is a very, very fluid situation, and the environment is changing every day. And so we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. So to that end, late last month, you were in New York City meeting at the NHL offices, all of the junior hockey stakeholders, I would call it, together in one room to begin kind of asking more of these questions. What's the next iteration? What's the next thing to come? How do we find a better way to all work together to achieve common goals? So take us inside. These were the stakeholders that were in there. On the Hockey Canada side, of course, the CHL, as mentioned, the OHL, WHL, and the Q, plus on the USA Hockey side and the USHL. Take us inside what those 2 days of meetings were like, and the spirit of what the end result or you're all working toward is.
Yeah, I think the NHL really is an interested party in all of this. So they were very good about setting up a forum for everybody to get together. And I think the objective was really to talk about, how we've all been adjusting to the new world. And so we all had an opportunity to share that and share what our opportunities and challenges have been. And it was good to hear from everybody and to understand what everybody's dealing with. We all learned things, and I'm sure they learned things about some of the things we're dealing with, which is always good. I think the NHL has been very good about trying to get us all together and have an environment where we can talk about this kind of thing. I would describe it as being pretty high level. There wasn't a lot of concrete, we're going to do X, Y, Z. It was kind of like, hey, if we blue skied here and we talked about a world with, it doesn't exist in reality, what could it look like? And so that's always fun to do, but there's obviously the realities of our lives that we have to deal with. So we'll see where it goes. I think it was a really good first meeting. But I wouldn't classify it as there being a ton of definitive next steps. But I think we'll continue to talk, and we'll see where things go.
Okay, so there's two big questions that junior hockey fans have stemming from just the overall landscape changing and what this might look like. So I'm asking for your opinion, not necessarily what you think might happen, to look into your crystal ball. But when it comes to, let's talk about the NHL CHL agreement, and 19-year-olds specifically, which the NHL has bargained with the NHLPA to try and have an exception of one 19-year-old per franchise to be able to play in the American Hockey League as opposed to having to go back to play major junior. Where does the CHL come out on that? What's the status of those conversations that need to occur? And, if you want to just put a real world application to it, if you're a hockey fan, think of the Calgary Flames and Zane Parekh, a truly dynamic, unbelievable 100-point defenseman in major junior, maybe not quite ready to do it at the NHL level on a night-to-night basis, but maybe better suited to play for the Wranglers instead of going back to junior, and is kind of stuck in the middle if you're looking for a poster child. So Dan, where do you come out?
Well, I think we're right in the midst of it right now, talking about what some options might be. The NHL has indicated to us that they would like to, their GMs have indicated they like a bit more flexibility in that area. So we are talking internally right now about what that might look like. If, what are some concepts we could talk about with the NHL and ultimately the PA about trying to provide them a bit more flexibility, while at the same time keeping in mind that, the system works for the vast majority of players. There's very few players who are ready to play AHL hockey at 19. And so, like I said earlier, I think when you play in our league at 19, I think 60% of NHL captains are from the CHL. And we believe that a reason for that is that they get a chance to demonstrate their leadership abilities when they're in their 19th year. The 19th year is a huge year for these kids. And so, they oftentimes play a ton of minutes. They play a lot of games. They play for they end up invariably being on teams that make runs for the Memorial Cup. So they're playing, multiple 7-game series leading into the spring. They play in all situations. They, again, oftentimes they're in the leadership group of their clubs. And so that kind of thing doesn't happen when you're the youngest guy in the room. It just doesn't. So I think, again, there are players that, again, I don't think there'd be an argument that probably are ready, but we don't think it's a significant number. And so we want to make sure that as we talk about this, we set things up in such a way that we can, provide the NHL with the kind of flexibility they're looking for, but also protect, the core of what junior hockey is and the experience that we provide these players, because it's worked for a heck of a lot of players. I think there's someone from the NHL who I've been in the room with a few times who said there aren't too many players who were damaged by playing their 19th year in the CHL. And go around the room and no one can really name one because it's a pretty good experience for these kids to be a leader and to sort of have that experience. So we're working on it. We'll see where we get to. Again, the NHL has been a longtime partner of the CHL. We have a good relationship with the people who we're dealing with. I think there's an acknowledgement that whatever gets done has to make sure that it takes into account the effects on both sides of the ledger, and we'll see where we get to.
And as we've talked about all these changing landscapes and everything that comes with it, there's some trickle-down effect, right? And some leagues have been affected more than others. There's been some reporting the last couple weeks, and I'd say it's probably really premature based on my understanding of it. But this idea or concept that's been floated out there of a national junior hockey league that might also involve some cross-border play and or the USHL getting involved. What are your thoughts on the potential of that? I'm sure you've seen the reporting, and could something like that be feasible down the road? Do you have your eyes open to something like that?
I think it's way too early to sort of comment on that or to really speculate. Like that was one of the, when I mentioned earlier about the meetings in New York, that did come up. There was discussion around that, and could it happen? But it's if we're in a hockey game, we're 4 minutes into the first period. There's a lot of time left here on this to determine what's possible and what's not, and there's a lot of things that have to be worked out. So, listen, I think there's always interest to talk, but I think when you get down to the nitty gritty, we'll have to see where it goes. Again, we're focused right now on how we can be the best, set up ourselves in such a way to be the best development league in the world, and continue to play that role, and that's what we're going to be focused on.
Yeah, I think that analogy is so good. A few minutes into the first period, I don't think we're fully going to comprehend or grasp these changes for 5 years, and that's not hyperbole.
No, I agree. I agree with you. Well, again, you've been around a long time in terms of understanding the development system, and it takes time to evolve. And I think the one thing that I would say is it's fascinates me. I spent bulk of my career in basketball, and I'm amazed always when I look at hockey how fast everybody wants to get to the next level. There's a rush to go to the next thing, and I think like when I think about the opportunities for these kids that are coming through our league, in my mind, I'm not exactly sure why everyone's in such a rush. Play 4 years a junior, accrue your scholarship, go on to college, whether it's in the US or Canada, use your scholarship, get an education. And then, if you're super elite and you're going to play in the NHL at 18 or 19, that's great. But to me, it's I don't know. Like, I don't know why everyone's in such a rush.
It's probably commentary on today's society in general. Everyone wants it right now, immediacy. And I thought your point that you made about the captains and the experience that they gain at the major junior level. 8 of the 32 NHL captains come from just the WHL alone. That experience that you get is, you can't buy that type of experience. And so everything that you do at the NHL level, you just do it on a slightly lesser scale that allows you to sort of develop at your own pace. So I'm with you wholeheartedly. Dan, let's wrap our conversation by talking about the Memorial Cup. Everyone's excited. 2026 hosted in Kelowna. We knew that, but this week the CHL announced that Guelph will be hosting the 2027 Memorial Cup. How did you decide on that, and what was the process like?
Yeah, so big news yesterday when Guelph ended up winning the bid process. And again, maybe for your viewers who aren't aware, the way the Memorial Cup bidding process works is it rotates around the 3 leagues. So it moves from this past year, it was in Rimouski, Quebec, and then now this year it's in Kelowna for this season, and then next year we announced that it's going to be in Guelph, Ontario. The selection is driven. So the CHL sort of sets up the parameters, but then we have an independent third-party group who makes the decision. And so that group had representatives from a variety of stakeholders, TSN, the NHL, Hockey Canada. We had a HOC chair from one of our past Memorial Cup when it was in Ontario, and we had a lawyer from Stikeman's who's really was a former alumni in the OHL, and so really understood the league. And they went through a process, and it was an extremely difficult choice. It came down to the final 2 cities were Kitchener and Guelph. And I had one of the site selection committee members who'd been on it in past years say this was the hardest choice that they've had to make. It was super close, but Guelph ended up being announced as the host. They're going to be celebrating their 200th anniversary as a city in 2027. So this is going to align pretty nicely with their celebrations, and the process works in such a way that there's sort of 4 areas that the site selection committee looks at. There's the business side and the hockey side. The hockey side is an important one because this team, the Memorial Cup is a tournament of champions. So there's the champion from each of the 3 leagues, and then the 4th team is the host, and they need to be built in such a way that they can compete with the other 3 league champions. So hockey is very important. Business hockey, infrastructure, and community. And I think in Guelph's case, I think they really told a really nice story about how they're going to sort of use the Memorial Cup as part of their 200th anniversary celebrations and really bring it to life in a way that's going to be memorable.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And I'm looking forward to the hockey side already. We've seen the Kelowna Rockets make a couple trades already to gear up ahead of the 2026 Memorial Cup. Some tough news on the injury front for them this week. But Dan, really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Western Front. So great to chat with you.
Yeah, Frank, thanks. I appreciate it. Anytime.